I'm waiting for my wireless mic, but I'm going to get started while it's getting here. You sure you're in the right class? This is valuation. Okay. Before I get started, how many of you have taken a class in this room before? I'm not talking about that first week where they do that little dance of the first semester. Outside of that, for how many of you is this the first class you've taken in this room? Yeah. This is the largest classroom at NYU. You know that, right? And it's funny because our four kids have all gone through college, and each of them had a chance to come to NYU with a sweetener, which is, you know what it is? No tuition. None of them picked that choice. I don't know why. But with every one of them, I went through that little dance, you know, the one they show you around the school and they lie all the time about how every professor is around all the time. And you know the lies, right? They take you on the orientation. So I went along and acted like any other parent, which is stay quiet, because that's what kids want you to do. And they came in on top of this room, because when you're out there in front of the building, you're actually on top of the room. And they said, right below this is the biggest classroom at NYU. But don't worry, you don't have to, you'll never take classes there. I almost put up my hand and said, no, that's not true. It's the only room I've ever taught in for the last 20 plus years. I don't like this room. It's got the ambiance of Madison Square Garden on a really bad Knicks day. Okay. It's not a great room for acoustics. Why? Because it's fine if all you want to do is hear me. As I said, with the mic, you'll be able to hear me. You know what this room was never designed for? The fact that you might want to talk and other people in the room might want to listen. So I'm going to tell you upfront that I'm going to try to do this. When you ask me a question, I'm going to try to repeat the question, because otherwise you have no idea. It's like a conversation going on. This is what happens when architects build classrooms. They think it's all about one-way conversation. So I'm going to try, right? But let's talk about this class. Before I do that, let me get a sense of where you're coming from. Any freshmen in this class? There's one person. You don't want to identify, so that's fine. How many sophomores? Juniors? Big chunk of the class. Seniors? So you want your grades in by when? Before graduation. So I remember that, right? I came to NYU in 1986. Seems like eons ago. I just ran into somebody whose mother was in my class. It's only a matter of time before I ran into grandmothers. Yeah. I've been teaching here a long time. And I came to NYU in 1986. They gave me a class to teach. It's a class called Security Analysis. Heard of this class? It's a class with a very long and hoary tradition. Started in the 1950s at Columbia University by a guy called Ben Graham. Never heard of Ben Graham? You've heard of his most famous student, which is Warren Buffett. It's a class that was taught in Columbia, a class that's been taught a long time. In 1986, I come in, this is the class they gave me. This is the class you're going to be teaching. I take one look at the class, said, this is the most boring class ever. I'm not teaching it. They should have fired me on the spot for insubordination. But it was a collection of topics. By the time we got to 1986, it was 4 weeks on stocks, and 3 weeks on bonds, and 2 weeks on futures and options, and 5 weeks on institutional detail. Like what, there was an entire session on listing requirements for the New York Stock Exchange. Teaching was so easy in the days before Wikipedia. Because today, if I started listing, there's no mic here.
I'll bring one down.
Okay. Today, if I tried that, you'd be checking out Wikipedia while I teach, saying, why is he listing these things? I can see them there. So I went to the head of my department and said, I don't want to teach this class. So good guy. He said, what would you like to teach instead? I said, I'd like to teach a valuation class. Just remember what he said. He said, don't do it. There isn't enough stuff in valuation to fill an entire class. But in 1986, he was absolutely right. There wasn't enough stuff in valuation to fill a class. There were no books on valuation unless you wanted to use Ben Graham's security analysis. Do any of you know what year the first edition of Ben Graham's security analysis was printed? Any guesses? 1934. What is happening in 1934 in the US? Don't think too long. You are coming off the Great Depression. If you read security analysis, it's imbued with risk aversion and safety. And who can blame you, right? You came out of the Great Depression. What's your priority? Save principle, don't take risks. I don't blame Ben Graham for doing that. By 1986, using security analysis would make any sense. It's a book for a different age. So the head of my department was right. There wasn't enough stuff out there to teach a class, but I really, really, really wanted to teach this class. And I discovered something very early in my university life that I'm going to pass on to you. If you want to get anything done at a university, do it subversively. Don't ask for permission. Because if you ask for permission, you know what would happen? A committee will be formed. You guys have experiences with what happens when committees get formed? They meet and they meet. They forget what they're meeting about, but they keep meeting anyway because they're supposed to. They're baby committees that they call subcommittees and subcommittees. It's all very incestuous, but about 35 years later, they talk show thing, right? 35 years later, can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you. They'd come back to you and say, you know what? You can teach the class, but by then I'd be too old to teach the class. So I said, I'll teach you a security analysis class. I walked in, closed the door. Remember, these were the days before there were cameras in the classroom. They had no idea what I was doing in the classroom. I could be teaching cooking for 15 weeks, but if I gave everybody an A, nobody was going to complain anyway. And I taught my first valuation class. It was the fall of 1986. This is my 59th semester teaching valuation. I teach the same class to MBAs, exactly the same class to the last slide, starting Monday. That'll be my 60th semester teaching. And I'm going to say something about this class that's going to encapsulate how I think about valuation. Everything I know about valuation, I've learned in the course of teaching this class. I'm not walking in and read it up somewhere else. I learned in the course of, let me give you a few examples. 1 year into teaching this class was October of 1987. I remember the day, October 19th. It was a Monday. I teach only Monday, Wednesdays. I'm a very lazy person. I don't like to teach more than 2 days a week. So I finished teaching my class. At that time, the Graduate Business School was downtown, right next to the American Stock Exchange. I finished my class. It was 10:30 in the morning. I come back to my office. I look out of my window and I see that everybody from the American Exchange floor is out there on the street. What happened? Fire alarm went off. You know what happened in markets, two markets on October 19th of 1987? It was a Black Monday, but there have been so many Black Mondays in history. It was a particularly Black Monday because on that day, the S&P 500 dropped 22% in 1 day. Convert that to today's numbers. What would a 22% drop in the Dow look like right now? Be an 8,000 point drop in the Dow? If that happened, you'd freak out before you left this room because my job's gone, right? People were freaking out. They'd never seen something like this in a single day. It was a Monday. Come back on Wednesday for the next class. Guess what the first question I'm asked in my class is? How, with your valuation tools, can you explain the entire market losing 22% of its value in 1 day? Company you can explain away, right? Bad things happen. How does the entire market lose 22% of its value? I'd be lying if I said I knew the answer, but I have this very bad habit that my kids point out, which is when I don't know the answer, I try to bullshit my way to an answer. And I started that process, and I'm glad I did. I started thinking about what is it that causes market crises. And since 1987, there have been other crises which have allowed me chances to revisit that question.
And I hope and pray we won't have a market crisis while we meet for the next 4.5 months, but nothing is guaranteed. So everything I know about market crises, I started thinking about on that day on October 1987. Move forward a few years, it is the 1990s, and you see a new phenomenon in public markets of companies with lots of potential, but no business model yet going public. I mean, those companies are always existed, but pre 1990s, where did they get their funding? We're a young company, lots of potential, no business model. Before the 1990s, where did those companies raise capital? Where do you think they raised capital? Venture capital in general, could be angel investors. They skipped that process and went directly to public markets. Nobody in public markets had ever seen something like this. I still remember the day in 1997. I don't remember the name of the student, but she put up her hand and she said, "Can we value this company called Amazon.com?" You know what Amazon.com did in 1997? They were an online book retailer. That's all they sold. Tiny company, lots of potential, part of the dot-com boom. And again, stupidly, I said yes. And I spent the next 2 weeks in class and outside class valuing Amazon.com. And I kept a journal of every roadblock I ran into because nothing came easily. It was like going to the dentist when they found 50 cavities. Every input was like pulling teeth. But I persevered and I kept a journal. And by the time I was finished valuing Amazon, the journal was 74 pages long. I slapped a title on the journal. I never waste anything I write. I titled the journal, The Dark Side of Valuation, Can Amazon.com Be Valued? It's still on my website somewhere. You can download it, but it became a book later on. But it's about how do you value young companies with lots of potential, but no established business model. Do we have a lot of those companies around right now? Palantir, Airbnb, Uber. I mean, you can go through the last decade. Every big name that you see out there has been a company with lots of potential. Did I forget? Remember to hit the record button? Right. Let me make sure. Yeah. Lots of potential. Every time I value one of these companies, and I valued Airbnb at the time of its IPO, Zomato, the Indian food delivery company at the time of its IPO. As I value the company, I draw on what I learned by valuing Amazon in 1997. And you move forward another decade. It's 2008. You're in the middle of another crisis, this time caused by banks behaving badly. Somebody in class again raises a question. Why, when banks behave badly, do the rest of us feel the pain? Company takes too much risk, it usually fails. But when a bank takes too much risk, the rest of the world feels the pain. It's called systemic risk. Again, I hadn't thought through it fully, but in 2009, there was no way you could avoid it. As you valued companies, you had to face up the question of how does the systemic risk play out in valuation? And then you get to the last decade. You get the decade of what I call the numbers company. Let's take Facebook. I'm going to call it Facebook. I just can't get around to calling it Meta. I'm going to call Google Google, not Alphabet. Let's take Facebook. What's the most impressive number about Facebook? You want to try? What's the most impressive number about Facebook? The number of users. It's not its revenues. There are companies with revenues far bigger. Its margins are impressive, but Nvidia's are even better. The most impressive number about Facebook is the number of people on its platforms. There's 3 billion people. 1 out of every 2 adults on the face of this earth is on a Facebook platform. And I include Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. It's amazing. 3 billion people. Most impressive number about Netflix is not the number of bad shows that they produce, though they're kind of reaching for the skies on that one, but the number of subscribers. No entertainment company in history has had close to 300 million people paying $23 a month or $20 a month every month. And I still remember again the day in 2017, somebody raises a question. Can we value a Netflix subscriber? Not can we value Netflix? I'd value Netflix as a company. I said, can we value a subscriber? Can we? Help me out here. Somebody help me value Netflix subscriber. You want to help? Don't worry, I'll make you look really good by the time this process is done. To value, are you a Netflix subscriber first? Okay. How much do you pay per month? That's the problem. I have a $23.99. All my kids live off my subscription. Sometimes I can't even get into my own Netflix. It says somebody's watching Netflix. I say, who, where? I've sent out multiple texts. Get off Netflix now. I need to get on right now. So, is anybody here pay for your own Netflix? Okay, a lot of family subscriptions. Okay, good to know. But you kind of know how this business model works, right? You subscribe to Netflix, you pay a price, a monthly subscription. But to value a Netflix subscriber, what do I need to start with first? In addition, knowing how much you pay, what do we need? How long a subscriber will stay on as a subscriber? Right? That's an interesting question. Is there a statistic that these user-based companies report that I can use to estimate that number? You know what a churn rate is? Churn rate in subscription-based companies is the percentage of people who renew. You know what the renewal rate for Netflix subscriptions is, right? It's like 95%. Most people don't forget they have a Netflix subscription. Even if they don't use it, you keep paying that amount. 95% churn rate translates into a life of about 15 years. I'm ready to go now. So 15-year life. What do I need to know? I need to estimate how much subscription revenue Netflix will get from you each year for the next 15. Do you think that might go up every year? You don't pay for Netflix. Trust me, it goes up every year. In fact, I read this morning it's going up again. Okay? Maybe at the inflation rate, maybe at 5%, so I project out subscription revenues. I'm almost there. What's the next thing I need to know? I need to know whether there's an expense that Netflix faces in servicing a subscriber. Probably not much. They don't produce content specifically for you. So essentially, there is a cost. It's a relatively small cost. You subtract that cost, you now have the income you're going to make every year for the next 15 years. That income is very close to cash flow. You discount them back, you come up with the value of a subscriber. In 2017, in response to that question, we did this, and I essentially came up with a value of about $500 per US subscriber. You think that's very parochial of you? The reason I said US subscriber is I could ask this question, but since you don't pay for your Netflix, you probably don't know. Anybody from India in this class? Don't worry, I'm not going to pick on you and ask you about a history question in India. You know what Netflix costs in India? There's actually a iPhone version that's, I think, $4 a month, in which case you can watch Netflix only on an iPhone. But for some Indians, that's the only streaming device you have. You see why this matters, right? A Netflix Indian subscriber is worth less than a Netflix US subscriber. I'm not passing any moral judgments. It's just economically. You know what I find surprising is every time Netflix has an earnings report, and one of the big things they say is, look how many more subscribers we have. I keep waiting for analysts to ask the question. You know what the question should be, right? You added 8 million subscribers last year. What's the question you should expect them to follow up with? Where are they, right? Because it matters. The value of a US subscriber is $500. The value of an Indian subscriber in the iPhone is like $80. They're not created equal. I'm surprised that nobody seems to ask that question. Since we're on a subscription-based model, after I valued Netflix, I valued Spotify. It's going public, and I said, hey, I've got the architecture to value a subscriber. How many of you have Spotify? I know you don't pay for it, just, you listen to Spotify, family subscription, all that stuff. You know what's different about Spotify? It looks a lot like Netflix in terms of structure, right? There's a subscription. There's a servicing cost. But what's the big difference between Netflix and Spotify? I didn't know this until I took a deeper look at Spotify. When you listen to music on Spotify, unlike Netflix, where it's a fixed cost, the way Spotify pays for music is by the number of streams that get listened to. So who's your favorite? You don't have to be, if you're embarrassed, make up Taylor Swift. That always works. Coldplay. So if you like Coldplay and you listen to Coldplay all day, that's so basically it's based on streams. You see what this does, right? When I sign an additional subscriber and they listen to music, that content cost now becomes a variable cost, which means the value of a Spotify subscriber is going to be worth less than the value of a Netflix subscriber because more of the costs are attached to the subscribers. That's a good thing to know because it says, look, when you increase subscriptions, not all companies are created equal. But that question triggered this whole, so I valued an Amazon Prime member. I mean, I couldn't stop myself. An Uber rider, that was really difficult. You know why? How many of you Uber? Come on. Okay. Don't tell me you use your parents' subscription. There is no subscription. How does the Uber business model work? You download the app. Does Uber make any money off you because you downloaded the app? No, for them to make money, you have to hit the app, the transaction-based model. If you value me as an Uber rider, I'm not worth much. I use Uber probably once a month, only when I'm desperate. Usually at 5:30 in the morning in Newark Airport, and none of the public transportation is working. My youngest son is also on Uber. He lives in New York. And I allow him to use my credit card because this is the only way I know he's alive sometimes, right? On some Saturday nights, I'll see 8 or 9 Uber transactions coming through. So what are you doing? I'm convinced he's got the Uber driver lifting him from the bedroom, taking him into the bathroom and back, an Uber charge, right? Basically, he uses Uber like it's going out of style. When you value an Uber rider, you can already see that valuing is going to be more difficult because the smallest users and the biggest users, I can value an average Uber rider, but there's going to be a huge amount of divergence. Not all user-based companies are created equal, and until you start to look at the business model. Amazon Prime is the most fun, right? Because there is this Prime fee of $139 a year. It's like a subscription. But what do you get in return? Free shipping, partially free entertainment through Amazon Prime, 10% discount in Whole Foods. I know all of this because I live on Prime. The one thing you can't take away from me. But here's the thing, when I had to value Amazon Prime that I discovered, that a typical Amazon Prime member spends 3 times more on Amazon than a non-Prime member. There's an incremental revenue. Why? If I want to buy something, I'm going on Amazon Prime. I don't want to deal with the Walmart front end of whatever their online retailing looks like. It was tricky to value, but it was fun to value because it says, look, this is what the Amazon Prime part of Amazon is worth. So if you get a chance, you go to my blog, you can see all of those, but essentially those all came from that one question in class. And then you get to 2020. It's March 6th, I was right here teaching exactly this class, and everybody gets a notification from the university at the same time. We're all looking at our phones, including me. You know what the notification said, right? Go home now. It's a week before spring break, but take the extra week off because there's this virus floating around which might or might not affect you. But we can't be around. But we'll be back in 2 weeks. A complete lie, but that's what they told us. We went home. Class continued entirely online, but for the rest of the semester. I didn't even come back for the next year and a half because we didn't have regular classes until well into 2021. What happened? COVID. The class went on, and it was the trickiest class I've ever taught because I'll give you a lead in. Each of you is going to have to pick a company to value. You can pick whatever company you want. You can pick fund companies you've always wanted to value. And people in that semester did, and then COVID hit. I was teaching my class on March 21st, I think, of that year, with almost the absolute bottom of the market collapse around COVID. Somebody in the class says, I'm desperate. So what's happening? You get COVID? He says, no, I picked Boeing to value. I said, you should be desperate. That's worse than getting COVID. Because we remember Boeing in March of 2020 was at the tipping point. What does Boeing do? Sell aircraft, right? To whom? Nobody's flying. The airlines had grounded, the aircraft were not, Boeing had debt, the company looked like it couldn't make it. So I said, you know what? Your company is so challenging, let's do it in class. On March 23rd, I actually valued Boeing in class. There's a YouTube video of it, where I said, look, I know the world is shut down, but markets go on. During COVID, we learned how to deal with this immense upfront uncertainty and make our best judgments. Everything I know about valuation, I've learned in the course of teaching this class. So one of my objectives over the next 28 sessions is I'm not going to give you wisdom. I'm going to give you a window into thinking through questions because you're going to face your own learning processes as we go through. So let's get the logistics part of this class out of the way. Okay? My office is on the 9th floor of Quebec. So by now you're familiar, there are 3 buildings that are tied up. This is the most confusing structure I've ever been in my life. It's easy for people to get lost, and sometimes that's a good thing for me. They keep looking for me for years and they never find me. Yeah. 969, you'll find me. Look long enough, you'll get there. Okay? And of course, when I have office hours, I also set up a Zoom link, but the people in the room will always get first dibs. So if you can come in, do come in. Okay? Just come in and say hi. Second, my email is your primary way of contacting me. I get on average 500 emails a day. I try to get them back as soon as I can. I'm usually pretty good about responding, but if you have a question, you need an answer, that's probably the quickest way to do it. There's a web page. It's really my home page from which almost everything we do in this class is going to be structured. I know there's this bright space thing, and I've seen NYU come up with all these. I've never used any of their learning management programs. I don't like them. They're like black boxes. So I will do what I'm supposed to do to not get fired. I'm supposed to put something on black, So I will do that, but everything that happens in this class will happen through my webpage. There will be office hours basically Monday and Wednesdays, 12 to 1:15. I teach 3 classes on Monday and Wednesday. I teach my corporate finance, MBA corporate finance class 10:30 to 11:50. The MBA valuation class from 1:30 to 3 to almost 3, 2:50, and then this class. So back to back to back. So, but I'm around. And if need be, I will add a 5 to 6 when we get closer to the quizzes so that you have a chance to get to me. Kasha is here. She is one of the, put up your hand, Kasha. So she is masterful. She took the class last year, so she knows the ins and the outs. She knows how much I plan to torture you. So if you want a shoulder to cry on, she'll be it. And Eleanor is also going to be the other TA. They are going to have review sessions once every week. Completely optional, but basically I won't, because I won't work through practice problems in class. That's not that's not what I like doing. It's not the best use of my time, but they will take past quizzes and exams and work through practice the mechanics. And if you have questions about valuing your company and where to find data, they're good resources to draw on. So here's what I'd like to start this class with. I call this the philosophical basis from which everything we do in this class flows. What I'm going to say over the next 25, 30, or 30 minutes is probably more important than all of the technical details of how to come up with a cost of capital or a cash flow or all the other neat stuff that the rest of the class is about. There are the broad themes that underlie how I think about valuation. Let's start with the first one. I'm often asked whether valuation is an art or a science. Let's start with the science part. Is valuation a science? You're allowed to have an opinion. It could be wrong. I mean, but you're still allowed to have an opinion. What do you think? Is it a science? Let's make it easy. Is mathematics a science? It's the only pure science. In fact, mathematicians are convinced that the rest of us are imposters. So I have a follow-up on that. What is it about mathematics that makes it a science? Go ahead. Oh, I can give you a lot of concrete finance stuff. It's not just concrete, it's absolute. I don't want to insult you, but what's 2 plus 3? That's not a trick question. 5. Left hand, right hand, computer, calculator, North Pole, South Pole. It's not maybe 5, it could be 5. It might be 5. It is 5. If you get any other answer, you're wrong. You get the inputs right, you get the output right. If you get the output wrong, you did something wrong. Physics is mostly a science. We all gathered together, went up to the 11th floor, managed to get one of those windows open, all jumped out at the same time. We don't fall in the order of our IQs or where you are in the corporate hierarchy. The laws of gravity are the laws of gravity. But in the essence of a science, you get the inputs right, you're going to get the output right. There is zero chance that valuation can ever be a science. I valued NVIDIA last week. I did my best. Why? Because I own NVIDIA and I have to decide, do I get rid of the biggest winner I have in my portfolio? So this is a momentous question to answer. I made my best judgments on inputs and came up with a value of 110. It's trading at 140. Let's take the 110. Did I get the right answer? Do you think 110 is the right answer? In fact, I'll guarantee you one thing. I'm going to be wrong 100% of the time. In what sense? I project our revenues, earnings, and cash flows for NVIDIA for the next 10 years. I'm going to be wrong because I am not God. In case you're working under that presumption that you are God, you have far bigger problems in this class. I would suggest deal with that with a therapist or something. You see what because you're trying to forecast the future, of course you're going to be wrong. Valuation, you can get every single input right and still be hopelessly wrong, and it's okay. I'm preparing you for the pain that this class is going to deliver to you because you go to value a company. How do I know I'm right? I'll tell you what, you're 100% wrong, and it's okay. Valuation is definitely not a science. So it must be an art, right? As I got off the elevator, I think on the 3rd floor or the 4th floor, I noticed a Picasso hanging on the wall. Not a real Picasso. NYU is not that rich. No, we're not Harvard. It's this picture of a Picasso. And I was reminded of when I took my older son, he's now 35 years old, when he was 8 years old, to the Met for a Picasso exhibit. You know how long 8-year-olds last in a museum? Not very long. He lasted about 30 minutes with immense amounts of bribery. I'll get you to take to the baseball card store. You can have an ice cream as soon as... He lasted 30 minutes. We come out and ask him, Ryan, what did you think about that exhibit? He said, Dad, I was not impressed. He said, it was a Picasso exhibit. You know what he said? He said, the guy can't get the nose in the right place. You notice this about Picasso's? The nose comes out of the side of the head, the top of the head, the back of the head. It's almost like he was either drugged or drunk, which in the case of Picasso, he was probably both. But for whatever reason, we've come together and we've decided Picasso is special. The nature of great art is you cannot really teach it. You can teach about painting in the numbers or making it look like it. Nobody's paying $80 million for your paint in the numbers or your impressionist art. I hope and pray valuation is not an art, because if it is, I've wasted 40 years of my life trying to teach something that cannot be taught. So if it's not a science and it's not an art, what the heck is it? I'll give you the word that I use to describe valuation. It's a craft. I'll give you the discipline that I think is closest to valuation. It is cooking. How do you master cooking? You could watch a Food Network all day. That's a good idea, right? Beat Bobby Fay back to back to back. Now, amazing amount of information you're going to accumulate. In theory, you can tell me how to make a souffle. But God help me if you have to actually try to make a souffle. You can read every cookbook ever written. But to learn cooking, what do you have to do? You have to go into that room in your apartment called the kitchen. I know you've been avoiding it like the plague because you got DoorDash delivering every day. And you got to start cooking. And the first time you do it, what happens? Fire alarms go off. Disaster. I still remember the first time I scrambled eggs. Nobody told me I was supposed to spray the damn pan. I scrambled the eggs. They look really good. They don't come off the pan. It was not a non-stick pan. Pan and eggs go in the trash, but I learned a very important lesson about scrambling eggs. Spray the pan. You learn cooking by cooking, not talking about cooking or watching other people cooking. You learn valuation by doing. which means the 28 sessions you're going to spend in the classroom are not where you're going to learn valuation. Because you're going to watch me talk about valuation. You will learn valuation by first valuing the company you pick for this class. You will learn more from that than anything you do in the classroom. Because you're going to face the real world. You have no choice. I've never used a case study in 40 years. It's almost absurd to me that we use case studies. You have 40,000 real companies out there. Why do you make up an XYZ widget company? Use a real company and you deal with the real world on its own terms. One of the things I'm going to prepare you for, and it's coming, is every week I'm going to put up what I call a valuation of the week. I'll value a company. I'll put it up there. And then I'm going to ask you to value the same company. You're saying, but it's week 2. We haven't taken the class yet. Do what you feel comfortable doing. So what do you think you'd like to value next week? Tesla, NVIDIA? Let's pick something exciting. Let me make the choice, but it'll be a company that you feel is in the news. Tesla is always fascinating. Because nobody's in India. What kind of company? Is it an automobile company, an energy company, an automated driving company? Who knows? So I'm going to value the company. I'll put it up with my story and my valuation. And then I'm going to ask you to value the company. And the first week, next week when you do it, my guess is most of you are not going to feel comfortable changing many of my inputs. You say, I don't know enough. You're going to change probably the third decimal on the risk-free rate and leave everything else untouched and say, oh, my value is just like yours. I'm just going to let it go. But here's what's going to happen as we go further, because I'm going to pick companies each week. The week after, I might pick Vinamilk to value. You know what Vinamilk does? It's a Vietnamese dairy company. You think, what? Hey, if all you do is cook pasta every day, you're going to get really good at cooking pasta. So I'm going to give you different kinds of companies. I'm going to give you my shot at valuing it. Somewhere along the way, I might value the Washington Commanders. You know, they sold for $6 billion, right? Hey, nice exercise to do, especially if they get into the Super Bowl. It'll give you something to think about while you're watching the Super Bowl. What's that team worth? What's that team worth? Who's worth more? Very different perspective. And I'll guarantee you, here's what's going to happen. As we go further and further into this class, you're going to feel more and more willing to disagree with me. That's when I know the class is working. I know the class is working. When you come to me in week 8 and say, the revenue growth used for the company, absolutely wrong. I'll let it go. You give me I'm glad you're getting to it, because that's the way we learn valuation. And the essence of a craft is you never, ever master it. Take cooking, right? Gordon Ramsay, master chef. In a particular cuisine, there is another cuisine where somebody else is going to be a master chef. The nature of a craft is you cannot shut the door and say, I know everything there is to know about this craft, I'm done. You've got to leave the door ajar. Second big theme that this class is going to, I'm going to drive you crazy by disagreeing or taking issue with you when you use the words value and price as if they're interchangeable. We know what drives value. It's cash flows, growth, and risk. It's always been cash flows, growth, and risk. Of course, you can put a discounted cash flow model to do it, but that's what drives the value of an asset. You know what drives the price of an asset? Demand and supply. Just what drives demand and supply? Of course, cash flows, growth, and risk play a role, but you know what else affects demand and supply? It's mood, it's momentum. It could even be revenge. You think revenge? You guys heard of the GameStop story? Have you guys been in a GameStop? Many of you look too young to you. This used to be a rite of passage for teenagers until about 10 years ago. We went into a mall, you hung out at a GameStop store, you played different games, and once in a while you actually bought a game. Those days are done. I mean, who goes and hangs out in malls anymore, right? They're like funeral homes. So the GameStop business model is broken, and about 4 years ago, the stock price had dropped to about $12. It looked like it was on its verge towards going out of business. When something strange happened, a group of people gathered together on Reddit. Social media is not out of this room or out of the markets. It is part of the markets now, called Wall Street Bets. And this group of people decided that they were going to push up the price of GameStop. So you know what? I actually did this torturous thing of getting on that Reddit group to see what they were saying to each other. It was mind-numbing. Because I was looking for maybe they have a business story here that they can give for why they think that. You know what the primary force behind them wanting to push the stock price up was? What were they trying to accomplish? I'm sorry, what? Not necessarily because you troll GameStop itself, because GameStop loves it. Their stock price goes up, right? So they actually like it. So who's being hurt? Well, who are they trying to hurt? The hedge funds, right? The hedge funds that they thought they were convinced that the reason GameStop had dropped in price was because the hedge funds had sold short, which they had. Wasn't the business model. It was the hedge funds that drove it down. Said, we're going to get revenge on you guys by pushing up the price. You know what they pushed the price up to? $400 per share. Of course, along the way, the hedge funds came on their side. They didn't even notice that the hedge funds were actually making money with them. That kind of got lost. But it was revenge. Mood, momentum, revenge. You haven't seen any of those in your finance classes, right? But there's a whole area of finance called behavioral finance. And you know what it's trying to do? It's trying to explain why prices can become different from value and stay different. And that's the reason I draw this contrast. When no, I don't do valuation for a living. I don't do appraisals for money. But once in a while, somebody calls me, can you value my company? And I said, do you want me to value your company or do you want me to price your company? And so what's the difference? To value a company, I've got to know what your business model is. I'll estimate cash flows and growth and risk and value the company. To price your company, I'm going to look at what other people are paying for similar companies. It's a very different process, right? When you see analysts use multiples, PE ratios, EV to EBITDA, and comparable companies or peer groups, don't let them get away using the word value for what they're doing. They're pricing a company, nothing good or bad about it, it's just different, and can give you a very different number than valuing that same company. We're going to spend a lot of this class talking about valuing businesses, but we're also going to spend a chunk of this class talking about how best to price companies. You know why? Most of you, when you get out there, whether you work for as an analyst or a banker, you're pricing companies, you're not valuing companies. I don't even know why bankers use discounted cash flow models, to be quite honest. Your job is a pricing job. You're using the wrong tool. So I'll draw that contrast and return to it over and over. You think, what are we going to value? Just about everything. I'm going to value companies that cut across the spectrum, right? But it doesn't matter what kind of sector, young or old, what sector you're in. So we're going to value banks and we're going to value technology companies. We're going to value startups and declining companies. I might even value Bed Bath and Beyond. Why? Because I feel the need for a shower. It's a depressing valuation to do, especially as it led up to its bankruptcy. We'll value every type of company, but we won't stop there. Not just about public companies, we value private businesses. I'd like to value that hot dog stand. The guy out there, he's been there 40 years. I know him. I know when he had his kids, where he went, they went to college. Private businesses, small or large. I even want to talk about valuing or pricing. Is Juan Soto worth $745 million as a Yankee fan? I truly hope not. But that's just my Yankee fan speaking. But how would you value a player to the team? Let's take Shohei Ohtani to the Dodgers. You think he's increased the value of the Dodgers as a team? I think he has. By doing what? If it's value, it's got to be cash flows, growth, and risk, right? What does Ohtani bring to the table that actually makes the Dodgers a more valuable team? Lots of merchandise, and he's made Japan an extension of the Los Angeles Dodger market. There's a reason Sasaki signed with. I mean, it's if you think about where most of the value for a sports team comes from, it no longer comes from how many seats, whether you fill your stadium. It comes from media rights. And the Dodgers have essentially opened up a global media business with Ohtani. Is Ohtani what's first? Ohtani's contract is not 700 million. Why is that? It looks. I mean, isn't that what the agent said? What about his contract makes it unique? In fact, he gets 680 million of the 700 million in year 10. He should fire his agent because that contract in dollar value terms is worth about 450 to 500 million dollars. It's a deferred contract. I think he's worth well over $500 million. If you ask me, does the same thing happen when Juan sold the Mets? I don't see it. I mean, the Dominican. I mean, where is he from? Dominican Republic, or is it? We're not talking about a big market that you're bringing in there. It's not like you're going to expand the market. Maybe you might help the Mets get to a World Series, which is a little bump. So why did they pay $745 million? Think pricing. How do you decide how much to pay for something? You look at what other people pay for similar things, right? The minute Otani signed a $700 million contract, you knew this was coming, right? Because now when teams have to pay, you're not looking at value added to teams. What did other people pay for similar players? It's a pricing game. We're going to value companies, we're going to value business, we're going to value assets, we're going to value sports teams. You'll ask, how much did Messi add to Major League Soccer and to Apple's value? You know why, right? Why does Messi affect Apple's value? Because Apple Plus carries Major League Soccer. They added about 10 million new subscribers to the stream because of Messi. So along this class, we're going to pretty much everything is a value question. And we're going to frame it and reframe it. So it's a class. I mean, the way I describe this class, by the end of this class, you should be able to value or price just about anything. So you go for Thanksgiving, and somebody says, is Bitcoin cheap at 109,000? I want you to be able to give a reasoned answer rather than, it's worth whatever it is. So this is a class that covers the whole spectrum. Value and pricing, it looks at it through different perspectives. I'll value companies as an investor, where you have very little role in how the companies run. But I'm also going to talk about valuation from the inside out. If you're a private equity investor and you can change the way a company's run, what would you change? So lots of different roles, lots of different assets. And the tools we use are going to be relatively simple. It's my fourth theme. I'm going to ask a question. It's going to sound like a strange question, but humor me. If I asked you to describe yourself as a person, would you more naturally describe yourself as a storyteller or a number cruncher? What comes more easily to you, working with numbers or telling stories? Think about it for a moment. You're saying, how would I know? You've known for a very long time. I'll tell you when I knew. I knew when I was 12 years old, after my first English literature class. I was asked to read Moby Dick, and I did. I was a good kid, came ready for the discussion. But 15 minutes in, I noticed nobody was talking about the whale. Put up my hand and said, when are we going to talk about the whale? And I remember the instructor saying, there is no whale. I said, what, did I read the wrong book? I distinctly remember a big fish in this book. And this is the metaphor. And my jaw dropped. And it stayed dropped for the rest of the class because they saw hidden meanings in things I didn't even know had a meaning in the first place. I came out of the class with a singular conclusion. I said, never again am I going to subject myself to this kind of bullshit. And the rest of my school life was laid out for me. I avoided the literature classes like the plague. It was Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Algebra 3 out of school. And these were the good old days. You went to college. There was no core curriculum crap where they made you take a history class. You know, this little dance, we're going to round out your... It's a complete lie. You know why they make you take all those classes? Because if you didn't, there would be no history department. So then you could just take numbers classes. You could get a numbers degree, go take a numbers job, and you were a numbers person for life. I was a numbers person. That comes more naturally to me. So I wanted to think back. What did you enjoy more, your literature class, your history class, your algebra class? Because that's where the seeds are sown. So how many of you are more naturally numbers people? Okay. How many of you are more naturally story people? Okay, I noticed some hands don't go up at all. So you're somewhere in the middle, you're confused people. So numbers and story people. Who do you think has the upper hand in this class? Numbers people or story people? you think of valuation, what do you think? Come on, be honest with me. When you think valuation, you probably expected me to come in with an Excel spreadsheet. Or if you've taken those stupid training the street classes, you think I'm going to open an Excel spreadsheet and we're going to do, neat tricks like you hit these buttons, every alternate row will turn a different color. Amazing. That'll make your valuation so much better, right? I will not, I promise you, I will not open a single Excel spreadsheet in any of these classes. But that's the view you have here. I'm a numbers person. This is a numbers class. Valuation is all about numbers. So I'm going to let you in on what I think is the dirty little secret that nobody in valuation thinks about or talks about. Evaluation can't be just about numbers. If all you have are numbers on a spreadsheet, you don't have an evaluation, you have a spreadsheet. You have a financial model. Much of valuation has become financial modeling. A good valuation is a bridge between stories and numbers. Sounds mysterious, right? When I show you valuation of my valuation of Tesla, or my valuation of NVIDIA, and you look at my revenues in year 10, let's make Tesla revenues, and you see 500 billion as my revenues in year 10. The question you need to ask me is, why 500 billion? The answer you don't want here is because I used a 15% growth rate for the next 5 years and 6% thereafter. It tells you absolutely nothing. The question really deserves an answer of, hey, what will Tesla do that will allow them to earn $500 billion in revenues? Is that a lot of revenues, $500 billion? What's the biggest automobile company in the world? Volkswagen and Toyota, it's about 300 billion. I'm giving Tesla 500 billion revenue. So already I am pushing the limits of an automobile company, which means my story requires me to tell you other ways in which Tesla can generate revenues. Like what? Maybe automated driving. Maybe software. You're saying, what software? Any of you own Teslas? You own a Tesla? A lot of you seem to have family ownership of Spotify, which I think is understandable. You're young enough that you own. You know that Tesla, without its software, is just a tin trap waiting in the garage, right? Without its software, it becomes almost useless. Right now, the software gets bundled in with the car. I can think of a world where you buy a Tesla, it comes with bundled software, but to get the upgrades for the new software, you might have to pay $200 a year, $500 a year. That's a software business model, a different business model. You see where I'm going? When I give you 500 billion revenues, it's my job to kind of fill in the details that this is where the additional revenues are coming from. Every number in your in your valuation has to have a story attached to it. And every story you tell me about a company has to have a number that goes with it. Like what? You tell me your company is great management. What does that even mean? What do great managers do? I'm pushing you. And I think it's good to push because you can say, this is what I think great managers do. What makes Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, why is he regarded, what has he done at NVIDIA that made, in addition to the results and the success, how did NVIDIA get to be a $3.3 trillion company? It's a semiconductor chip company, right? Oh, first up though, does it make chips? It designs chips. You know that NVIDIA designs chips. You know who makes all of the NVIDIA chips? Taiwan Semiconductors. So it's a design company. Already a business model that means you can have much higher margins, right? You're like a software company. You design, somebody else makes the chips. They mark them up. But the reason NVIDIA is where it is over the last 10 years, they've been able to get into new markets before everybody else. First time this happened, you could say they got lucky. It happened with the gaming market, where NVIDIA and AMD got there first. Then it happened with the crypto market. Remember with Bitcoin and you needed powerful computers? NVIDIA was there first. First time you're lucky, second time you're really lucky, and then the AI market comes about and they do it again. And he said, this isn't luck. This is something that's by design. That's what great management at NVIDIA does. So the way I will reflect that in NVIDIA is when there are big markets I see in the future, I'll let them get ahead of others. It forces me to think about what does it mean when you say great management. So every story you tell about a company, brand name, about its great management, about And if you throw buzzwords at you, I'm going to put them back. You say, there's AI. Let's be specific. What exactly do you mean by saying AI is good for you? What does it do for you? Where does it show up? So we're going to talk about that link between stories and numbers. And I'm going to make it explicit. And the reason I'm going to make it explicit is I have to be explicit when I value companies. Because as a number cruncher, when I value a company, what's my first instinct? Open a spreadsheet and be off to the races. I've got to slow the process down. I force myself to tell a story. It's gotten easier over time, but I'll go through the process by which I try to make sure the story gets sold. Which brings me to my fifth and final theme. About 5 years into teaching this class, I think it was day in 1991, I woke up to a crisis of faith. Strange set of words to use in the context of a valuation class, right? But let me explain what I mean by a crisis of faith. I don't know about you, but I don't value companies because I'm intellectually curious. I don't lie back and say, I wonder what NVIDIA is worth right now. Maybe you do, but I don't. I have other things to wonder about. I value companies for one reason and one reason alone, which is I want to take advantage of those valuations and make money. I'm completely mercenary in this process. But to do that, I need faith. Faith in what? In two things. First, faith in my own value. I told you I valued NVIDIA at 110. Do I feel sure about the number? The word sure doesn't even enter the lexicon because I'm making judgment calls along the way. That's about what I think it's worth. But I have to have enough faith that I can act on it. And second, I have to have faith that the price will adjust to value. Remember, you don't make money by getting something right. The price has to come around. You know why I use the word faith? Because if you ask me to prove that my NVIDIA valuation is right, I can't do it. How do I prove it? If you ask me to prove that if you buy an undervalued stock, that the price will adjust to value, I can't prove it. So I'm going to give you the same answer your priest or your rabbi will give you if you go up to them and say, this being religious is a lot of work. I'm all sinning that I'm not able to do. Can you give me some proof that God exists? You know what the answer is going to be, right? I can't do, but have faith. Pisses you off, but essentially saying there's no proof. I can't prove it. And I'm going to say the same thing here. You will want to see proof that all of this is going to pay off. I can't offer that proof. You will either acquire the faith or you will not. There's nothing wrong with not having faith. But I can tell you where my faith comes from. I can tell you when my faith is getting tested. And it gets tested every single day. You know when it gets tested? When the stock moves in the wrong direction. It's almost like God is knocking and saying, do you still have faith? How about right now? Right? And that's okay. You know? We don't live in a world of absolutes. You can be okay questioning your faith. And when I was growing up, I remember listening to Mother Teresa talk, and I remember she started talking, saying, every day I wake up and I question the existence of God. He said, Mother Teresa can get up every morning and question the existence of God. I can wake up every morning and question my valuation of NVIDIA. You know, I can live with that. That's why I've always had very little patience with what happens in Omaha, Nebraska every year. What happens in Omaha, Nebraska? Investing Woodstock, right? People gather from around the world to pay homage to a 93-year-old man. There used to be two 93-year-old men, but now only one 93-year-old. Talk about valuation. I have great respect for Warren Buffett, but he's human. But the problem in Omaha is people think that they have absolutes, that they found the one true way, that they're the chosen ones. It's not a world of absolutes. You're going to be wrong. Sometimes you'll make money. Sometimes you won't. It's not in your hands. So we'll talk about faith, and I will talk about when my faith is getting tested, and I write about it all the time when I make a mistake and say, this is where I think I got it wrong. In terms of structure, we're going to start the next two sessions laying out the big picture, that intro slide. So I've already hit you with 3 emails, maybe is it 3 or 4 or whatever it is. Okay? So we'll start with that intro sections. Then we'll move on in the next 10 sessions with the inside details of valuation, cash flows and discount rates and growth rates and betas and risk premiums and We won't value a single company fully during those weeks because we want to get the foundation right. And then we'll spend about 4 sessions with companies, valuing young companies, old companies, declining companies across the spectrum. Then following that, we'll turn to pricing companies. What's the difference? How do we price companies? Price earnings ratios, EV to EBITDA multiples, all those different multiples you run out there. How do you use them well? How do you misuse them? We'll spend a session on valuing what I call individual assets, some of the parts of a company, what's different, why might you do that? And we'll spend a session on valuing privately owned business. What's separate, unique, or different about valuing privately owned businesses? We'll spend about 4 sessions talking about option pricing in valuation. For the moment, I'll leave it there, but there are times when you can draw on option pricing models to value certain kinds of companies. It's called real options. Then followed that, we'll talk about what's different when you value an acquisition. In particular, we'll talk about the 2 words in acquisitions that keep coming up, control and synergy. What are they? How do you value them? And how do you change the value of a company? So if you're running a company, you're brought in as a CEO of a company, you said, double the value of the company, what are some of the levers you can use? In session 28, we'll kind of look over the whole class, using your valuations as a framework for looking over the class, because by then you will be turned in the values for your companies. So I'm going to tell you what percentage of the people in the class found their companies undervalued, overvalued, the 10 most undervalued, the 10 most overvalued. And you can compare yourself to every semester I've taught this class so you can see whether you're moving towards more undervalued companies or more overvalued companies. It's too late for this, but I did send you the reminder. I mean, there's not a whole lot I ask of you in terms of priors, but there are 3 basic skill sets that you should probably bring in. I will say some terrible things about accountants in the next few weeks, and I won't take any of that back. But I'll also tell you that much of the raw information you get to value companies comes from where? Accounting statements. So if you don't know the difference between gross income, operating income, and net income, and it's not your fault, it's your accountant's professor who's too busy talking about debits and credits and neat IFRS rules that they forgot to talk about different. I would like you to revisit accounting. I have this condensed version of an accounting class that I created just for this, where I talk about how do we use accounting data in valuation. And I break every accounting rule and I don't care. Okay? The second big tool set is we live in a world where we're surrounded by data. None of you is going to complain that you can't find enough data. You know what you're going to complain about? There's too much data and it's pulling it in different directions. You know what the discipline that was designed to deal with that was? Statistics. Again, statistics classes missed the point, right? They essentially spend so much time in the abstractions that this is a tool we need in almost everything we do in business. So if you're again interested in kind of brushing up, there's a 12-session statistics class on how to read a regression, not how to run a regression. None of us does that anymore because you have tools that run regressions for you. But if you use Minitab to run a regression, what exactly does that tell you? And finally, there are a few basic finance tools. If you're still struggling with present value, stop. At some point in time, you've got to be in control of just taking time value of money. So there's a foundations class that I've created again with very specific pieces of finance that I might draw on in this class. Along the way, I will torture you every single day of the week for the next 15 plus weeks. Let me take that back. During spring break, I will give you 7 days off. And here's how it'll go. So this is Wednesday. We have the class. Today I will skip this, but at the end of your Wednesday class, you get what's called a weekly challenge. Completely optional. And what I will do is take the Monday, Wednesday class from that week and create a challenge where I take what you did in the class and take it the next step. Say, can you expand on this? Can you take it the next step? On Thursday, I'll send you an update about where you're on the project. This is really, there are 2 ways to think about it. This is like a GPS. So there's this big project that runs through the class. What this will tell you is this is where you should be on the route, knowing fully well that some of you haven't even started. This is really to provoke guilt. You are really getting behind. We're getting to the destination. You haven't picked a company yet. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So every Thursday I'll send you a reminder saying this is what you should be doing this week. On Friday, I will do a webcast on a completely practical thing. Thing like, no, I want to get a risk-free rate in Vietnamese dong. How would I do it? So I'm going to talk about estimating risk-free rate in a currency, a little 20-minute YouTube video. On Saturday, you'll get a newsletter. You say, what newsletter? One of the problems when you're in a class this big is it's easy to get lost, especially as you get to week 3, week 4, week 5. In the newsletter, here's what I said. This is the page we're on our lecture notes. You're saying, what lecture note? There is a lecture note packet. You can download it again in case you completely lost it. This is what we did in the last week. This is where we're going. And this is what you should be doing. So don't expect major breaking news here. It'll just be, hey, no, this is where you should be in the class. On Sunday, I will send out a weekly challenge. I'll send out the solutions to the weekly challenge I sent on Wednesday. Remember, it was completely optional. So if you didn't do it, don't check out the solution. What's the point of checking a solution to something you didn't try? But if you tried it, you can check the solution. Again, don't send me your answer and say, did I get the right answer? This is designed for you to start building up. No. Monday, we have class, and I'll send an email after the class saying, this is what we did in class, but I said, I was there. You were here physically, but sometimes you might leave mentally. No, you know what I'm talking about, right? You get these moments when you wake up and say, what happened in the last 63 minutes? Lots of things. So this will be a kind of, this is what we did in class today, just in case you left mentally. And on Tuesday, I'll send you my valuation of the week. So the first valuation of the week is going to come out next Tuesday. As I said, I'm still deciding whether to value Tesla or NVIDIA, but you're going to see it every Tuesday. And this process is going to repeat every week. In terms of class rules, there are very few. I would like you to be here, even though I'm going to make it easy for you to not be here. Because every one of these classes is going to be zoomed and recorded on YouTube. But if you choose not to be here, this is what I want to remember. There are 10,355 people taking this class with you. Because the recordings I'm going to put online, I'm going to put all the material for the class outline. You know how much they're paying as tuition? Nothing. If you're going to do what they're doing, you got to ask yourself, why am I paying? What's the school charging? Like 15,000? Every session is like 200 and something dollars. You don't show up. No, I think, you can, there's some advantage to being here physically. So I'd like you to be there, even if you're 20 minutes late. Even if you're hungry, you want to bring a pizza and eat it while you're watching. I don't, it doesn't bother me in the least. I have a very high threshold for distraction. Okay? Your lecture notes will come in 3 parts. All 3 parts have now been updated for the spring of 2025. You can download them in one of 2 formats. You can download them as a PDF file. The advantage of PDF is you can run in every platform, it looks the same. Or you can download them as a PowerPoint file, and I'll add a caveat. The nice thing about the PowerPoint file is it has the notes section in it, so you can check to see the notes that go with each slide. The downside is Microsoft Mac PowerPoint doesn't play well with Microsoft PC PowerPoint. Don't ask me what. It's not, I have issues with Microsoft. This is one of those issues. So when you do the PowerPoint slides, the PowerPoint file is huge. Sometimes you can have issues. Try it. If if it works okay, then all the more power to you. If you do miss a class, there's no excuse for actually missing the material in the class. As I said, by the end of the day, the recorded version of the class will be available not just on Brightspace, and it'll be available as a YouTube video, because the advantage of YouTube is you can watch it on an iPhone, you can watch it with low bandwidth, you can watch it with cell service, whereas the stream that comes from NYU you require broadband and bandwidth. So I will convert every session to YouTube video, and and all of the sessions as we go through will show up on that link that you see in the bottom. So each session you'll see the links to the session, the material used, and as we roll through, you'll see all 28 sessions show up. There's no book required for this class, almost everything you need. But if you feel the need to have a book, I have 5. Right? My first book is Investment Valuation. The 4th edition came out. Don't buy it. It's obscenely overpriced. I actually refused to buy my own book from John Wiley, saying, are you guys crazy? Who pays $100 per book? But if you feel rich, or your parents feel rich. Or you could use that 4 months of Netflix subscription and buy, if you want to buy the book. It's the only one of these books that's a textbook. It comes with, if you can get the third edition, it's perfectly okay, right? It's much cheaper. If you can get an Indian edition, a pirated edition, somebody sent me a copy of an edition in India where somebody had taken the book, Xeroxed every page. They were selling it outside a train station for like $2. They thought I was going to be upset. I said, that's a lot of work. So if you can go to an Indian train station and buy it for $2, go for it. No? So that's investment valuation. The second is called Demoter and Valuation. That's actually the very first book I wrote in 1992. Moment of ego, I threw my name in there. In fact, I asked the publisher, could we call it O.J. Simpson on valuation? Because that trial was going on. That would sell a lot more books. They said, no, put your own name. It's a practitioner book about all the things practitioners do. Then there's the dark side of valuation, about valuing difficult to value companies. Young companies, troublesome companies, commodity companies. If I had to pick one book that I would say is a book that really is about the craft of valuation, that would be it. It's a little book of valuation, which is really little. It's 230 pages. I took the investment valuation book and said, how small can I make? It's amazing how much you can shed when you feel the need to shed. So if you don't have much time, the little book of, and it's cheap. You can get it for $12, $13, $14 now on Amazon. And about 7 years ago, I wrote a book called Narrative and Numbers, about connecting stories to numbers, something we talked about as to start the process. I don't know how many of you have Apple devices, iPads or iPhones, but if you go to the App Store, there's an app called YouValue, which allows you to actually value a company on that app. So you can put in the numbers like 12 companies. It comes with a money back guarantee. You know why? It's free. So if you don't like it, tough. You got your money back, move on, right? But it's basically just an app you can download. You're saying, what if I'm an Android? It's your problem, not mine, right? I'm not, you know how much work it is to even maintain an Apple? Every time Apple does a system upgrade, I mean, we have to hire some computer tech guy to do it. 25 hours, 30 hours fixing this. So it's some point, it's not going to be worth it. But for the moment, it's still working. The website for the class, and this is going to be the central place to go, will be, this is where you'll find almost everything you need for the class. Lecture notes, every single link is there. And the YouTube channel is where all these lectures will go into one playlist for this class. Every email I send you, because there's going to be an email every day. Last semester, I had 136 emails over the course of the semester. And I know what you're going to tell me. Somewhere along the way, say, I did not get that email. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take every email and I'm going to put in what I call the email chronicles. And you have no excuse. You can't say, I didn't get that email. It's there. You can go look it up on every day. So it's going to be a place you can go to check out the emails that have been sent on the class. Right? Wait, there's more. Google Calendar for the class. You can check out when the quizzes are. There's my blog on which I talk about pretty much whatever I feel like talking about that week. So I'm all over the place. There's a Twitter feed, and I'm looking for numbers. I'm at 420,000. I'd like to get to 500,000. So if you can get your friends, your relatives, you have multiple emails, get them all on. And if you really have more time on your hands, I don't see how you could. You go to that link, you'll see more readings on pretty much everything we do. Let's close off, right? I could tell you grades don't matter, but that's so insulting. Of course they do. I would like you to focus on learning, but let's face it, it's nice to get a good grade as well. Truth in advertising, I'm going to grade this class like every finance class gets graded. There's a grading distribution, which is about 25 to 30% A's and A minuses, about 50 to 60% B's and B minuses, and there will be C's and D's in the class. You'll have to try to get there, but it can happen, right? So I want that to be out there that, this is a big class, 10% C's and D's is a lot of unhappy people I will end up with. I don't want you to be in that group, but you got to try to get into that group. It really requires a lot of work. Any questions? before we end for the day. So here's what I want you to think about before you come back for the next class. Next class, we're going to talk about a project. It's going to be a group project, right? So what I'd like you to do is find at least 3, 4, or 5 other people in the class that you'd like to create a group with. In next class, I'll talk about what you're going to do as a group.
I just wonder, Professor,
Yeah, go ahead.